From the Bible, Book of Esther. Esther said, "All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court who is not summoned, there is only one law, that he be put to death, unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter so that he may live. And I have not been summoned to come to the king for these last 30 days." Esther's words were reported to Mordecai. Then Mordecai told the messenger to reply to Esther, "Do not think that because you are in the king's palace that you can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have attained your royalty for such a time as this?" Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go, assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens will also fast in the same way. And then I will go in to the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and did just as Esther had commanded him. Now, on the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner courtyard of the king's palace, in front of the king's house. And the king was sitting on his royal throne in the throne room, facing the entrance to the palace. When the king saw Queen Esther standing in the courtyard, she obtained favor in his sight, and the king extended toward Esther the golden scepter which was in his hand. So Esther came near and touched the tip of the scepter. Then the king asked her, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half of the kingdom it shall be given to you." Esther replied, "If it pleases the king, may the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for them." Then Haman went out that day glad and pleased of heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai at the king's gate, and Mordecai did not rise up or tremble in fear at his presence, Haman was filled with anger toward Mordecai. Haman's wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Have a gallows built 50 cubits, 75 feet, about 23 meters high, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go joyfully with the king to the banquet." And the advice pleased Haman, so he had the gallows constructed. Now the king and Haman came to the feast with Esther the queen. And the king said to Esther on the second day, also as they drank their wine at the banquet, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. What is your request? Even to half of the kingdom it shall be done." Then Queen Esther replied, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, spare my life. This is my petition, and spare my people as my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated." Then King Ahasuerus asked Queen Esther, "Who is he and where is he who would presume to do this?" Esther answered, "The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman." Then Haman became terrified before the king and queen. Then Harbona, one of the royal eunuchs attending the king, said, "There is a gallows standing at Haman's house, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of the king, which saved the king." And the king said, "Hang him on it." So they hanged Haman on the gallows which he had prepared for Mordecai, and the king's anger subsided. The king took off his signet ring, which he had taken away from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther put Mordecai in charge of Haman's estate. King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, "Behold, I have given Haman's estate to Esther." And Haman was hanged on the gallows because he had stretched out his hands, attacked against the Jews. Now you write to the Jews as you see fit, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For a decree which is written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's signet ring may not be revoked. The king's edict granted the Jews who were in each and every city the right to assemble and to defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate the entire army of any people or province which might attack them, including women and children, and to plunder their spoils. This would take place on a single day throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, that is, the month of Adar. A copy of the edict issued as law in each and every province was published to all the peoples, so that the Jews would be ready on this day to avenge themselves against their enemies. In each and every province and in each and every city, wherever the king's command and his decree arrived, there was gladness and joy for the Jews, a celebration and a holiday. And many among the peoples of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews had overcome them. Now, on the 13th day in the 12th month, the month Adar, when the king's command and edict were about to be executed, on the day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to overpower them, just the opposite happened, so that the Jews themselves overpowered those who hated them. Thus, the Jews struck all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them, and they did what they pleased to those who hated them. Then Mordecai recorded these events and sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far. He ordered them to celebrate the 14th day and the 15th day of the month Adar every year, because on those days the Jews rid themselves of their enemies. That was the month which turned their sorrow into gladness and their mourning into a holiday, so they should make them days of feasting and rejoicing, and sending portions of food to one another, and gifts to the poor. Thus the Jews agreed to continue the practice they had begun, as Mordecai had written them to do. For Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast pur, that is, the lot, to crush and destroy them. But when it came to the king's attention, he commanded by letter that the evil plan which Haman had devised against the Jews should return on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore they called these days Purim, from the word pur, and because of the instructions in this letter, as well as what they had seen and what had happened to them, the Jews established and made a custom for themselves and for their descendants and for all those who joined with them, so that they would not fail to celebrate these 2 days according to the written instructions and according to their appointed time every year. So these days were to be remembered and celebrated by every generation, every family, in every province and every city. And these days of Purim were not to lose their significance from among the Jews, or their memory fade from their descendants. So Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, along with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter about Purim. Mordecai sent letters with words of peace and truth to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, to establish these days of Purim at their appointed times, just as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had decreed for them, and just as they had established for themselves and their descendants in regard to their times of fasting and lamentation. So the decree of Esther confirmed these customs for Purim, and it was written into the record book.